All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Trying to be faithful to our time. But actually, before we get started, just a few housekeeping notes that I should mention. We do record these each week, so if you missed any, you're welcome to go back and see that. Just as a procedural understanding, I turn that on before the thing starts, so be careful what you say. Just saying it's recording. So and only say nice things to me because this is being recorded. Okay, just saying, just keep that in mind. So for whatever that's worth to you. Also, I want you to know that we have 2 more sessions. So tonight's session 3, we have session 4, session 5. So we will end this on September the 4th. And then beginning on September the 11th, I will begin our next run of Emotionally Healthy Spirituality. And I invite all of you to come and be a part of that. I have already ordered 30 units of the 3-book pack. We have those in the office. If you're interested in taking the class, you can buy those from us at $30. How about that? So, and actually that's a little bit of a deal because if you get it from them, it'll cost you a little bit more. We were able to get a discount. So first 30 are going to get it at a discount, and others want to do it, they'll have to order from the company itself. Sign up is up here and the handout's up here. Just to let you know, I encourage you, if you want to be a part of that, would love to have you, but as I say, you just need to let us know in the office and we'll give you a pack and we'll get you signed up, and then if you could pay for that, that'd be fabulous. And I hope to have more than 30, but we just started on faith buying 30 packets, and we'll get that started. So that starts the 11th, September the 11th, and that will run for 8 weeks. So I remind you, it's a hefty commitment. It's a 2-hour every Wednesday. It's a hefty commitment, but it is well worth it. If you talk to the folks who went through the first session, they can tell you that it is well worth it. It is a meaningful investment. So I encourage you to think about it if you are interested at all. So that will be our primary Bible study option for adults during that run. We're trying not to complicate it with too many other things. That'll be the primary one during that period of time. There may be a time that I move that back to a Sunday, especially to accommodate our choir folks. But for now, we're going to give this a shot on Wednesday and see if we can't get another run in. So that's where we are right now. All right, any questions about any of that before I dive into tonight's? Yes?
I just highly recommend it.
Thank you. Yes. This is an unpaid solicitation right here, unsolicited.
I'll second that.
Yes, there's a second up here. So I think it should be noted that I'm going to feed them here in a few days to talk about this. So this might have a bearing on positive comments at this moment, but we're going to say no. All right, very good. All right, so we're going to go ahead and dive in and jump into session 3. So we'll see how things unfold for us. We'll go ahead and remind ourselves of the ground rules. I'll just very quickly go over these. Most of you have been here every time and you know these, so I'm not going to belabor them. But we're going to speak the truth in love as we communicate. We're going to do that in a loving way. We're going to refuse the fool's choice, which means that it's either I come at you with fist of fury or I say nothing at all. We're going to find that there's a way to have a meaningful conversation and state your understanding. You have an opportunity to do that. And then what would Jesus do and say? So kind of ask yourself, would Jesus really post this or would Jesus repost this? Ask yourself that before you click it and send it on the merry way. Okay, so let's dive in. So tonight, we're going to talk about 2 more commandments. So what are tonight's commandments? The first one is, thou shalt live out your convictions. Thou shalt live out your convictions. And the second one is, thou shalt have perspective and depth. Okay, so we're going to open these up for you, and we're going to talk about what these things mean. And so let's see if we can dive in here and see what these are about. So, I've got to point in the right direction here. Okay, there we go. So, thou shalt live out your convictions. So, I make a statement here, and this is what I say. We often think of doing some large heroic act. But life is actually made up of many small but significant decisions and moments that collectively paint a portrait of a faithful life. Would you agree or disagree with that statement? Would you agree or disagree with that statement? Do you agree? So years ago, Fred Craddock was a phenomenal preacher. He is now passed, but he is a preacher of a generation just one back. But he was a preaching professor. He had many books. He was very well known and had some amazing stories. And he used to tell this story. And he said it like this, and he kind of dated himself here because he talked about writing a check. He said that most of us in our life think about writing the big check for God, right? That I'm going to write this one big check and I'm going to give it and it's going to be this kind of heroic thing. He said, but life is actually made up of the change in your pocket, is basically what he said, of the little acts of kindness that you do that cumulatively add up over time. And so the problem with big check thinking is you overlook or ignore a lot of small change moments that really can have significant impact, right? So you need to think about that. So it's important for us to recognize that when we're going to start talking about living your convictions, that even there, we're going to talk about convictions that meet us at every juncture and level of our life, and that do really infuse or inform our day in and day out activities and choices. These are going to be decisions that are driven, hopefully, by our convictions. You are making decisions based on something, okay? We are thinking, acting creatures. You are making a decision based on something. And often, I think, maybe it's not as examined as it should be. Now, don't drive yourself crazy. I'm not trying to say and I've had friends that have been down this road, and we had to have power chat about that. They got so obsessed about finding God's will that they would go in the lunchroom at school, this was in college, and they would say, does God want me to have this cereal or this cereal today? And I said, God doesn't care. I was so loving like that. Back then I was just so loving and caring. I said, I don't think God cares what cereal you eat today. I think He wants you to fuel up and hit your day and you'll be okay. You know, we can get crazy about this. But on the other hand, it does matter that I am paying attention to what's happening in my life and that my decisions do impact other people, right? So, how I eat actually does impact the rest of the world. You realize that? How I eat really does impact the rest of the world. So, the problem with having bright children is that they exceed you so quickly, you know. and ours did that really quickly. And we have two bright daughters, and they're very thoughtful and very engaging in their world. And my youngest, as you know, has done some advanced schooling, and that's the other thing. You train them, and boy, they just pass you real quick, right? And that's good. It's lovely. But you realize real quick, you know, that you've been left behind. And I realized that after my daughter had some classes at Duke, talking about the environment and talking about how we eat and talking about those things. And here I'm getting ready to take a big bite out of my hamburger, and she says, you realize that raising all this beef cattle is probably killing a lot of people. And of course, again, I understand, you know, they're fresh off of school, I get all that. But her point was salient, because there are places in the world where they're cutting down vegetation, and even rainforests are being destroyed so that cattle can be produced in mass. And part of the reason is because there are countries that have incredible appetites for meat, including our own. If you look at the amount that we consume compared to the rest of the world, it actually is sort of embarrassing. So, God may not care which cereal you eat, and God will not be upset if you go out of here and have a hamburger. But if you are not cognizant of the fact that how you eat affects other people, God will be concerned about that. Is that fair? Do you understand the distinction I'm making? That we need to think about how we have an impact on a larger world, and that our decisions do have an impact and make a difference. So, anyway, let's move on. So, let's do a conviction checkup. So let's do a conviction. First, we're going to begin with a conviction clarification. All right, so I'm going to tell another old preacher story. You know, there's going to come a moment when you all are just going to say, well, old preachers tell old stories, and then I will be very hurt. So I'm glad you don't say that immediately, but I'm going to tell you an old preacher story. And this is how it goes. It goes like this. A couple gets married, and so they've been married for a short period of time, and they're going to have a celebration meal where they're inviting folks over to this meal. And so they're preparing this meal, and they decide they're going to have a really nice ham. They're going to fix this really nice ham for folks that are coming over. So they're in the kitchen together, they're preparing the meal, and the first thing that the new wife does is she takes a big cleaver and she cuts both ends off of the ham, and then she throws it into the pan and she throws it in the oven, and the husband is looking at her and he says, "Dear, why did you do that?" And she says, "Well, I don't know. That's what my mom always did." And he said, "Well, I'm just kind of curious." She said, "Well, I'll call her right now." So she called up her mom and she said, "Mom, I've been watching you cook and I'm fixing the ham, and the first thing I did is I cut the ends off this ham, and why did you do that?" She said, "You know, dear, I really don't know. It's just something that my mom always did. You know what? I'm going to call her and we're going to find out." So then she called her mom and she said, "Mom, 2 generations from now we're all asking the same question. Why did you always cut the ends off the ham?" And she said, "Well, dear, my pan was too small." Okay? 3 generations of this habit have continued, unchecked and unquestioned, because it had a very reasonable explanation at one moment, but it did not continue to have a reasonable explanation farther down the line. How many things in our conviction list we can trace back to a true conviction versus things that go back to what we've grown up in culture, what we've picked up in different places? When I was in seminary, one of the books that we read, and it was a fascinating read, John Igny was his name, and he wrote a book called Churches and Cultural Captivity. Riveting. I know that you all want to run out and get it right now, right? Churches and Cultural Captivity. So I'm going to give you the cliff notes. So I know that you want to go read it, so don't let me spoil it for you. But I am going to tell you this. His takeaway was that most churches in the South had far more of Southern culture than Jesus' conviction in them. Think about that. Far more of Southern culture than Jesus' conviction in them. All right? And so his point was that we were held captive by this cultural overlay that was getting us. So I'm only saying that we need to do a conviction clarification. So if I were to ask you to do a conviction clarification right now, and I'm not going to ask you to do this out loud, so we're not going to do that, but I want you to think right now, what are some of the top things that you value? What are some of the top, just think about values, and maybe we'll just throw out values. What are some things that you value? What are some things that you would value as you would call a conviction or a value? What would that be?
Honesty.
Honesty, love it. What else? Integrity. Family, love it. Honesty, integrity, family, beautiful. All these are wonderful, wonderful convictions, right? But how do you play these things out in your life? And how do you see those things lived out in your life? Because it's easy for us to say that these are our convictions. It's another thing when you put it to practice and you put it to the test. So, illustration. And again, conversations that I've had with folks over the years, and especially in my role with doing some counseling, and especially as I've counseled young couples that are preparing to get married, and as we talk about what those things are, I talk about their shared convictions, and I kind of put them to the test a little bit about things, and I ask them questions. But do you know what is often the thing that sticks? I mean, we're having these high-level conversations, everybody's on something, and everything's great. And then I'll ask this question, and it's funny how things really get strange real quick. I say, "That's great, you all seem to be so much on the same page, you've really thought this through. Kudos to you, that's all wonderful. Can you tell me, where are you all going to spend Christmas?" And then all of a sudden things start to get, and one or the other will say, "Well, of course at my house," and the other one looks at him like, "Excuse me? At your house? But Christmas is the most important time of the year for my family." "Well, no, it's the most important time for my family." Okay, guess what? You just hit a roadblock with a deeply held conviction, right, about something that's meaningful. Is it important to spend time with your family? Absolutely. But if you're building a new family, guess what? You're going to have to make some decisions. This is why Lisa and I got into the great family holiday rotation. Well, that and the fact that when you work in the church, guess what? You don't get holidays off. You know, some of you get holidays off. Have you ever seen me take a Christmas off? Of course not. Because Christmas Eve is always going to happen and we're always going to do a service. We have traveled with little ones on Christmas Day more times than I can tell you, and the Waffle House is the only place open. And I just love sitting in a Waffle House with two small children and every trucker on the road gathered around my children who are missing their kids while Elvis is singing Blue Christmas. It is a moment that I will never forget, right? But, you know, look, this was what it is, right? We made these decisions, we made these, and we worked though. We traveled on Christmas to get to family because it was a priority for us, right? Conviction. All I'm asking you is, are your convictions straight-lined to something meaningful, right? To something that has substance. So, it's worthy of an investigation, especially when something happens and it triggers an emotion and you have a visceral reaction to something, and then you need to stop and ask, why am I reacting to this? What does it mean? Is this because this really is dancing all over a true conviction of mine? Or is this actually something more about something going on in me? And we're really good to dress up our convictions when we want to. You will be shocked and amazed to find out that there have been moments that I've embarrassed my wife. I know that this is hard for you to imagine. I know it's really hard. But there have been moments when I've embarrassed my wife. And one of the worst instances of this has happened historically at car dealers. Buying a car has tested every fiber of my Christianity on more than one occasion. I got to be honest with you. And we were having one of those moments early on in our marriage. And this young fella, he didn't know which side was up from anything. If he was 20, he was, you know, he might have been 20, I don't know. But he was trying to sell me this car, and he just started this routine with me about, you know, he's going to go talk to his manager and all this kind of stuff. And I finally just looked at him and I said, son, I'm sitting in front of you, talk to me. My wife is crawling under the table. She's like trying to get behind that plant if she could, you know, and I'm just locked in with this guy. And this is the moment that just really kind of broke it all for me when he reached under the desk and he pulled out a jar of pickles. Homemade pickles that his mama in Texas had made. He said, well, can I give you some pickles? And I thought, son, you better pull that bottle back right now, or you will not like what's going to happen next, you know. And so we leave this place, and we're having this conversation, and Lisa is kind of gently trying to help me, you know, come back to the planet and let it go, you know, deep breaths, all that kind of stuff. And I'm still a little bit agitated, and I launch into this thing where I said, you know, this is about justice. And she just looked at me like, you've got to be kidding me. And I'm like, no, this is really about, because he is trying to take advantage of us. And here we are, young adults, and he is taking advantage of us because we don't have these resources, and this is about equity, and this is about, you know, I just went on and on. But the longer I talked, the more hollow it sounded, and I finally just shut up and said, okay, dear, I'm sorry. Let's just move on. Let's move on. But you see, that really was about me being frustrated with not being able to get to a place of conversation with him, but I couched it like it was some kind of deep conviction that he had wronged me, right? Well, not really. Yeah, he was playing games with me. But you know what? I figured that out, so I should have just walked, right? When I figured that out, just walk away. Why did I need to engage that? That's on me. And that was because I confused a conviction, right? I confused a conviction with casual concerns, right? And sometimes we're guilty of that too. We confuse our convictions with casual concerns. We kind of commingle those things, and we get really out of joint about things that really at the heart aren't that critical. And so as you do your deep dive on your conviction clarification and figure out where does this really lock into my desire to be true to family, true to God, be honest, to be faithful, to be whatever. Where does it lock into that? Good, figure that out. But then also figure out the things that really just don't matter as much, right? And that's where you can take a breath and let some stuff go, right? You got to be able to do that. So let's if we're going to talk convictions, let's at least talk convictions, right? Let's not talk about things that are around them. And then I'm going to say, if it's really a conviction, you ought to be able to calendar it. If it's really a conviction, you ought to be able to calendar it. So you say family. Early on in our relationship, young minister, getting started. Lisa's working, and then kids come along, right? Things get crazy. My first job description for my first job was 4 pages. 4 pages as associate pastor at this church in Kentucky. And the last line was, and other duties as assigned by pastor, right? And so I was fresh out of school, I was eager, I was ready, and I was just going full guns. And then one night, Lisa just had a heart-to-heart with me and said, you really have another family too. And I said, but I'm serving Jesus. And she said, you'll do it alone soon. Right? She said it in a kind way, but you get the point. And she was right. And I had to kind of come to grips with the fact that my family mattered. As much as my church family, my home family was a gift from God to me. And I needed to take care of that. So I had to start putting on my calendar that there was time that was family time, right? And that was hard to do, especially early. You all are going to find this hard to believe, but some churches, not you all, but some churches can be very demanding of a minister's time. And sometimes unreasonably so. And I had to start to figure out when to be able to say no. Because I have things for my family that I need to do. And I am making this decision. If it's a real conviction, it'll fit on your calendar somewhere. If you tell me it's one of your deeply held convictions and you open up your calendar and I cannot find one place where you have made a point of doing something about it, then you and I better go back to the first statement. Is this a deeply held conviction? Are you with me? You following me? Okay, good. All right. Questions at that point? Anything? Lisa will be happy if I move off this page, I can tell. So, I'm going to move on. Oh yes, and we are a community of, I'm sorry, last one. We are a community of compassion. So, the other part of the conviction checkup is to realize that as part of a community of compassion is that we hold each other in balance and we help one another to hold true to our values, but also to do it in a Jesus kind of way. And so our community helps us be a community of compassion. All right, let's move on. So, transformational convictions. Transformational convictions. So, what do we have here? This is what Cho says. Especially in Western Christianity, we are enamored with a gospel that comforts us, but we are rarely drawn to a gospel that disrupts us. The truth is, though, the gospel does both because we need both. There's something dangerous when we are only inclined toward a comfortable gospel. Ouch. Ouch. So, another quick story. I am full of stories tonight. I don't know what happened, but I'm full of stories tonight. So, seminary. I'm at Southern Seminary. Lisa and I are freshly married. We're there. Enjoyed my time immensely. It was a wonderful place, wonderful teachers, wonderful students and friends. It was a good place. Amen. So I'm in my ethics class one day, and I learned something very fascinating. I learned that one of my ethics professors rode his bike to campus every day. Did not drive his car. He did not live close, but he rode his bike every day to class. And when pushed about that, his answer was he did that because, and this is some years back, he was already concerned about environmental issues that we were heading toward. He was also concerned about the fact that we were in a consumer society that seemed like we always needed to have new and bigger and better, and that he felt that it was a better use for his family resources to have one less vehicle and to be responsible with how they did that. So he rode his bike every day, and somebody asked him, well, isn't it bad when it's snowing? What do you do when it, he talked about what he had to do when it was raining or snowing and all that kind of thing. But here's the other side of that. We would have never known that because he never advertised that. He never made a point about that. That was not something he led a class with. We only knew it because one of the students had actually seen him on the side of the road riding his bike and asked him directly about it. He was a very humble man. He did not do this as any kind of a protest against the world. He did this as a personal decision where he said, I feel that if I'm serious about what the gospel means to me, this is how I enact it, this is how I live it, and this is what I will do. You see, we really, really don't love a gospel that asks us to do something, do we? We're really good about talking about taking up our cross and following him. But it gets hard. I know this is true. I know this is true personally. I know this is true every time we enter the season of Lent. And I start talking about, a lot of churches ask people to sort of give up things during Lent as a way to just be reminded of the sacrifice. And you all give me the look I'm getting right now, which is like, what you talking about? You've got to be kidding me. Especially when I start getting, they say, oh, sure, okay, I can give up chocolate, maybe. But I say, why don't you give up social media for 6 weeks? Some people say, well, which arm should you cut off, right? All I'm asking is this. Are we willing to live a gospel that actually calls forth something from us? Or are we not? And I say, humbly, be careful about jumping up and down on the Bible to make a strong point if you're not willing to stand on it every day about how you make personal decisions about your life. Okay? That's all I'm saying. That's all I'm saying. It's got to go all the way, right? Okay. All right. Moving on. Tolstoy, the great Russian writer. I love this quote. Everyone thinks of changing the world, but no one thinks of changing themselves. Right? True. It's just a lovely statement and truism. And Tolstoy, what a great writer. So let's move on. Let's step on. So stepping into the unknown. Stepping into the unknown. Okay, so let me tell you this story. I actually used this in a sermon a few weeks ago. Some of you might have had a chance to hear that, some not, and that's fine. So let me just retell the story quickly. This is one of the stories that he has in the book, and this is really great. And he talks about Michelle and Andrew Schindler. Michelle and Andrew Schindler. These are a couple that he knew personally, and he's a lawyer, and they're a young couple, and they're getting started in their life, and they pretty quickly realize that they are not able to have children, that they are dealing with issues of infertility, they're unable to have children, and so they're struggling with what to do. And so Michelle, his wife, pretty quickly comes to the realization that adoption would be a good option for them. Andrew, who had never really toyed with that idea, thought about it, was really struggling with it. And so he shares with Eugene that this was the prayer that he had with God. This was the prayer that he offered to God. And it goes like this. God, I'm looking at this thing called adoption in front of me, and if I'm honest, I tell you I'm not open to this idea. But I'm open to becoming open to it. Isn't that a beautiful prayer? So can you imagine this couple having this hard conversation? And one of them certainly is already moving in a direction, the other one is resistant, and they're having this issue. But he says to God, I'm not open to this right now, but I'm open to being open. God, help me figure this out. So, what happened, as you can imagine, God did open him to this. And so they had a child they adopted. But then they actually adopted 2 additional children. But they did that through fostering children. They decided that was the way they would go, so they fostered some children and then ended up adopting it. As they went through that process, Andrew, who is a lawyer, came to the startling realization that I have a law degree and this is a complicated process to do an adoption. I know what to do and it's hard for me to do it. We have some resources and this is hard for us to do it. Think of all the other people who are trying to figure this out. So he creates a group to help this process. And this was called the Children's Law Center of Washington, as in Washington State, and the Permanence Project. And what happened is, between the period of time from 2012 to roughly 2020 or so, they were able to facilitate the adoption and permanent homes for 468 children. 468 children. Because they said, this needs to change. We need to do something about this. This is just a couple who experience this difficulty in their life, and so they do something about it. Along the way, as I said, they started fostering, and they realized this was a crisis too. So, and they realized that back in 2012 in Washington State, there were only 175 foster families in their community. Now, maybe this is just their community. I'd have to go back and read more carefully, but there were 175 families. So they started hosting these weekends over a period of time to encourage people. And by 2018, there were 2,500 families who were choosing to foster children. This is one couple who made a difference. One couple. If you were in if you had the chance to hear my sermon, you also heard me say that I had recently been in conversation with some folks that are working with the governor in our state. They're running a program right now talking about every child in Tennessee, and they're really concerned about the fact this is a crisis for us. They say that there are over 5,000 foster families, which is really lovely. The problem is there are over 8,500 children that need placement. There is an issue. There is an issue. I say we should think about that. Tomorrow, I'm actually going to a meeting that's hosted for the East region of pastors. It's going to be here, well actually it's going to be heading toward Townsend a little bit, but at a church we're going to gather. There's a group of pastors who will be gathering with Emily Hager, who is on the governor's staff, and we'll be having a conversation about how do we encourage folks to be thinking about fostering so that we can have some more foster homes for families that need it. What's that going to look like? And I'm going to be at that meeting tomorrow, a lunch meeting, and I'll bring back more information when I have it. But here's all I can say to you. When I first heard about this crisis, I'm a little bit more like him. I'm thinking, God, I'm not sure I'm open to trying to figure out how to make a big program and figure out how to pay for this and figuring out how to do all this. But I'm open to being open, right? And all I'm asking us as a church is to be open about it. That may mean some of you would consider that as an option. It may mean that we find someone in the community who considers that to be an option, and we surround them with support. And we provide things that they need so that it can be feasible for them. Maybe that's what we do. I don't know. I don't know what this is going to look like. I just know that it's an issue. And here's the thing. Don't tell me how much you care about families and how much you want to protect them if you are unwilling to do things that tangibly families actually need to be protected. Okay? So, just saying, that's an example. That is just an example. Thoughts, comments about that? I'll turn my back while some of you slip out of the room. It's all good. No, it's all good. Just kidding.
I think it's very worthwhile.
Yeah.
And of those 4,000 people, they have so many that drop out every year.
That's right.
Partially because they're not capable.
That's right.
And they shouldn't be doing it.
Yeah.
But so yeah, I mean it's a terrible situation.
And please hear me carefully. Fostering children is not for everyone. There are folks for whom you are not in a life situation where you can do that or should. It's okay. But if you are not in that life situation to do that, and someone around you is, you do have an opportunity to support and help the person who is and who can. Okay? So don't leave here with this guilt trip of saying, oh no, I've got to figure out how to, I've got to go clean out that extra room now. I'm not saying that. But I am saying, let God speak to you about how He wants you to help and how we can walk alongside others and help them. That's what I'm saying. I think that's what I'm saying.
When I mentor the inmates over here, half of them were in bad foster homes. The other half should have been in foster homes.
Right.
That's the way it is.
No, and you're exactly right. Yeah, and again, when I said earlier that some people should not be fostering kids, I don't take that lightly. I don't. And there are absolutely foster homes out there. So even when I use that number and say there are X number of these, some of those shouldn't be there. They shouldn't be. Yeah.
Pastor, you know, I don't know if you know or not, but we have two foster parents that bring children in, and that well behaved. But in saying that, I think one has 15 and the other one has, one has 15 children.
Yeah.
And the other one, I know that, I don't remember that I got a head count on the others. And I don't know how, I wonder how she does it. She is very, the kids come in, they're well behaved, they're dressed. But there is a process for that. I mean, there is a true process when you've got one family that has 15.
I agree. No, I agree. And again, 15, God bless them. That's more faith than I've got. I'm just saying, I don't know. We're in capacity. I don't know. And maybe it's because if there were more, there wouldn't have to be 15 in one home, right? So, all right. Well, let's move on. Okay, so here's another Cho quote right here. He talks about being a visual peacemaker. In other words, that you really let your actions be seen. This is a human problem, a global problem. If we can't work and be as Jesus calls us to be, we are failing in our calling to Christ and are failing the world. Ouch. Again, powerful lines. If we cannot, as the body of Christ, and may I just say, parenthetically, that I am disturbed by the fact that, look, we live in dark days and we live in difficult days and all that is true, but I am far more concerned that the light of Christ is not more prevalent through the loving actions of churches as opposed to the bickering and fighting of churches over all kinds of things that just really do not point to Christ. This concerns me more. I think this is one of the reasons that folks do not see us to be a viable answer, is because we say that they'll know you're Christians by your love, and they say, I don't think I want that. I've seen how you love each other, right? Not so good. And we got to be careful. We got to be careful. That's all I'm saying. It's a visual peacemaker. We have a responsibility. All right, being brave and not brash. I love this too. Here's another great, he has some great quotes in here, and that's why I shared them with you. So here's another one. He says, the Jesus I follow is not the emperor arriving on a chariot, but the humble king arriving on a donkey, the all-powerful Lord who chooses a different way, who comes to serve. The Jesus I follow made deliberate efforts to get to know and befriend those who were shunned by society. The Jesus I follow did not have a home and challenged people to not follow the law, but to live into a new life, a new way of thinking, to bring forth the kingdom of God on earth as it is in heaven. And may I just parenthetically say, when he says not follow the law, he meant as they were practicing the law. Okay, as they were mispracticing the law. Because Jesus said, I didn't come to destroy the law, I came to fulfill it. He came to bring it to the next step. So, think about that. The humble Jesus versus the conquering king. He distinctly made a difference for a reason. And we are about being brave and not brash. But you can be bold and not have to be brash about it. And you can speak out of love for others. All right. So let's move to the second part of this. Yeah, we need to get going here. Okay. Thou shalt have perspective and depth. So I have a passage here out of Ephesians for you. Out of Ephesians 3. I pray that out of his glorious riches he may strengthen you with the power through the Spirit in your inner being, so that Christ may dwell in your hearts through faith. And I pray that you, being rooted and established in love, may have power together with all the Lord's holy people to grasp how wide and long and high and deep is the love of Christ, and to know this love that surpasses knowledge, that you may be filled to the measure of the fullness of God. It's a hymn we used to sing. We just rarely ever sing it anymore. And it is, there is a wideness in God's mercy. There's a wideness in God's mercy. You know, the thing about grace is really tricky. We talk a good game about it, but sometimes we struggle to understand it. And we really struggle to understand it when we see somebody experience grace that we really don't think deserves it. Oops. Oops. Grace either works or it doesn't. And if someone opens their heart to Jesus, God steps in. That's what he does. That's who he is. That's the amazing, forgiving, loving God that we serve. And I'm just amazed that some people, Jesus has chosen to forgive them, right? He's chosen to forgive some of those folks. I certainly wouldn't have, right? Then it's a good thing I'm not God, right? And I'm pretty sure it's a good thing you're not either. But grace is grace. And it works or it doesn't. And we've got to figure out what that means. Ephesians says, oh, that you would know the width and the height and the depth and the breadth of God's love. That you would experience it in such a way that you can't help but share it with others. So here's one of the places we also get in trouble. So how does this, when I talk about having depth and meaning, right? When I talk about that, one of the places we get in trouble is that we have this sort of persecution syndrome and we become easily offended. And so let me give you some things about this idea of persecution and the way the church in America in particular thinks about it. So Diana Butler Bass is she's been a professor, writer, a lot of things. She writes a lot about church history and those sort of things. And she talks about two different kinds of Christianity, just from this very perspective. And one she calls cultural Christianity, and this is a painful line, a theological disposition that interprets Christianity as an us against them morality tale of our suffering church that is vindicated by God through its global victory over other worldviews, religions, or political systems. Will everybody join me on Onward Christian Soldiers, and let's all take up arms and go out and, slay people in Jesus' name. Oh, wait a minute, that was the Crusades. That was not good, okay? Didn't work. Instead, what if we were Great Command Christianity, who through loving our neighbor as ourselves demonstrate what that looks like? Again, I am not saying to not take a strong stand on something you hold strongly. Please do that. But I am saying that chopping off somebody's head is not a great way to start a conversation about conversion, okay? It isn't going to get there, all right? It isn't going to help you. How do you be a love your neighbor kind of Christian? Well, that means you've got to meet them where they are. That means you've got to find out about them. That means you've got to be genuine in your concern and how you talk to folks. You can also be genuinely concerned for them and about them occasionally, but do it out of honesty. Honesty. Just had a conversation with somebody the other day who was in a very delicate situation, talking to somebody about some stuff. They were really having an issue, and she said, out of my mouth just blurted this thing, which you should know I'm a Christian. And they said, well, I'm a Christian too. And she said, wonderful, then Jesus will help us figure this out. And they had a very productive conversation, and it began to move forward. Now, it doesn't mean at the end of the day they were both on the same page, but it does mean they had a healthy conversation and built a relationship. This is the Great Command Christianity. All right, well, let's move on. So let's also we got to figure out how to not be so easily offended. Here's another great quote. Oh, you all are going to love this. Well, you may hate it. I don't know. You may love it. I'm not sure. I'd love it if everyone was Christian and said Merry Christmas, but I realize that not everyone is Christian. Frankly, if my faith was dependent on whether someone said Merry Christmas, that wouldn't be much of a faith at all, would it? Rather than being so obsessed with keeping Christ in Christmas, we ought to be more concerned with keeping Christ in Christian. I remember this some years ago. Starbucks did the great sin, right? They got rid of Christmas stuff on the cups, and people were lining up to boycott them, right? But then there was just a deeper line of people getting in line to go buy the coffee. We didn't hurt their business model in any way by pitching a tantrum about them getting rid of Christmas cups. It didn't. It didn't move the needle at all. As a matter of fact, all it did is make us look like angry people, right? Instead, what if we can say, look, I choose to say Merry Christmas because that means something to me. If you want to say Happy Holidays, I know that you mean me well, and I thank you for that. But I'm not going to fight you over it. I'm going to tell you that I am grateful that I can say Merry Christmas. Because it is. Because I know what it means to me and how it's changed me, right? So I think it's more important to keep Christ in Christian than it is to worry about what Starbucks puts on their cup. And yet these are the things that we fight about, right? These are the things that we find ourselves off target, off page, doing crazy things. All right, let's get some more perspective on this. Let's just be real. there are 245 million Christians who face high levels of persecution in the world today, and the vast majority of those are in North Korea. That's the top offender on the list. That's persecution. People who are killed for their faith. People who are punished and tortured for their faith. Often American Christians can become so caught up in thinking people are out to get us that we root our policies and voting decisions in fear. In other words, we end up voting against instead of for candidates and issues. Don't just vote for what you're against. Show us what you're about. Create a better story. Compel us. Invite us. Help us reimagine a better story. Last time I checked, we still have a country that has separation of church and state. We do. There are challenges and they need to be addressed realistically. But I can guarantee you that I have heard many people crying foul about those things, only to dig a little deeper and find out that it really wasn't a violation at all. If, for instance, a church says, you are violating my rights because you won't let me bring a candidate and put them in front of people and say, vote for them, then I think you're wrong to begin with. That is breaking separation of church and state, and I think that's a violation of what we're supposed to do. I believe that is. So don't tell me that you're being persecuted because you don't have the right to do that, because that was never your place to begin with. That's not your job, right? That's not what should be happening there. That's my opinion. I humbly offer it as my opinion. You're welcome to have your own, but that's my opinion. So there I'm moving to the third position. I'm offering my opinion, okay? So there it is. So I think he's right. I think that we are too easily offended. We're going to have to figure out how to take a breath and not get so upset about some things. That doesn't mean we don't value certain things. It doesn't mean we don't speak up when there's a need to do that. But I'm saying we far too often jump when there really isn't much there. Okay? And that's scary. So what does the Bible say about this? So let's kind of talk quickly about this. And I'm not going to spend a ton of time because our time is fleeting from us. Had too many stories tonight. I apologize. But we're going to move through this. The Bible has different views about how we deal with the government in particular. Romans 13 basically says, obey rulers and authorities. And Romans 13:1, I'll start reading it. Let everyone be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except that which God has established. Okay? So in essence, what Paul says, by the way, Paul says this writing about Rome, the same people that ended up killing him. He went to Rome and ended up being executed in Rome. This is who he's talking about, right? He's saying that God put government there for a reason. Okay, that's one view. That's one part of the view. By the way, the biblical view is nuanced. Those of you that went through the Four Freedom study have heard some of this from me, but you get to hear it again. I know you're excited. Okay, 1 Peter 2:13-16 basically says that by your being obedient, you become a witness to other people. That through your obedience, you become a witness to other people. He says, dear friends, I urge you as foreigners and exiles to abstain from sinful desires, etc., etc. Live as such good lives among the pagans that though they accuse you of doing wrong, they may see your good deeds and glorify God on the day he visits us. And then they go on to submit yourself to these authorities, etc. But he's saying basically, you become such a good example to others that they can't help but see that there's something different about you. And again, this is submitting to a government or an authority that often persecuted Christians, but they still were good citizens, and by so doing proved there was something different about them. Okay, that's the Peter version. In Acts 5:29, we see a different take on this. Peter standing before the synagogue leaders, but still authorities, and they are telling him that he can no longer preach the gospel. And Peter said, we must obey who? God, rather than human beings. So first we have the obey authority, God put there. Then we have the as you obey, you can find a way to be a witness. Then we have, but there will be times that the government will ask you to do something that goes against God, and always go with God, right? And then we get to Revelation. And it's all broken loose then. And the only word, the primary word that is given in the book of Revelation is be faithful and stand, even if it costs you everything. It actually calls for you to be willing to give up your life for your faith. This is what Revelation asks. It's in there. It's in there. All right, Jesus had something to say about this too. Jesus was asked a very tricky question. The rulers came to him and they wanted to trick him. They said, should we pay taxes? And of course that was a loaded question. So Jesus, being Jesus, outsmarted him and said, bring me a coin. They did. Whose picture's on it? They said Caesar. And then he says that famous line, then render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's, and unto God that which is God's, right? So in essence he was saying, you've got to choose your kingdom priority, right? You've got to choose your kingdom priority. He says, look, you don't get to jump up on your high horse and say, well, I'm no longer going to pay my taxes because I'm a Christian and I'm not under their law. He says, that doesn't fly. No, if you owe them tax, you pay them a tax. He says, but you do not give them your full allegiance. And if they ask you to do something contrary to what I'm asking you to do, you get to say no to that, right? Choosing your kingdom priorities and finding a balance without losing sight of your highest allegiance. How do I be a good citizen of this world while also knowing my highest allegiance is the kingdom of God? It's tricky. It takes work. It takes effort. And it takes a lot of prayer. But maybe this will help. Micah 6:8. He has shown you, O mortal, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you? To act justly, to love mercy, to walk humbly with your God. Here is his answer to what it means to live the Jesus way. Is you should do what? You should act justly, love mercy, walk humbly with your God. This is a really, really great place to begin. Let's close with prayer. Amazing God, we are grateful that you followed through with your conviction to love us completely. This brought you all the way into our world, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. And this took you all the way through a life of living side by side with us, showing us how to love you and how to love others. And this took you to a cross where you gave everything to demonstrate your love for us. And from there the resurrection. Oh God, may we carry our cross, but always with a resurrection open heart that knows the power of your love that flows through us and in us will give us the courage and the strength to truly love in your name and the way that you call us to do so. This is our prayer in Christ's name. Amen. God bless. Thank you all so much for being here. Appreciate it. Thank you.